What you are about to hear is an actual reading from a Chicago Tribune newspaper from the past. Everything that you will hear is exactly as it is written. Please keep in mind that the language used reflects the era it was written. If you enjoy these videos, please click like and also subscribe to the channel and click that bell icon. And now for the news. News as read from the Chicago Tribune for Thursday, February 6, 1941. Henry Chopper reporting. The weather today. For Chicago and vicinity, cloudy and slightly colder, occasional snow flurries on Thursday. Friday, partly to cloudy and continued cold. Moderate to fresh north to northwest winds, preceded by westerly winds early Thursday. The low temperature, 21 degrees. The high temperature, 35. Today's headline: Police Plans Told by Green. Springfield, Illinois, February 5th. T.P. Sullivan, who has served 3 preceding state administrations in various crime prevention posts, tonight was named superintendent of the state highway police force by Governor Dwight Green. The appointment was on the recommendation of the governor's police advisory committee headed by Brigadier General Thomas S. Hammond. The governor announced that for the present, Sullivan also will be acting superintendent of the Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation and acting superintendent of parole supervision. He will handle these 2 jobs without pay. As head of the highway force, Sullivan will work under Walter A. Rosenfeld, director of Public Works and Buildings. In the other post, his supervisor will be Rodney H. Brandon, Director of Public Welfare. And now for world news. Cairo, Egypt, February 5th. The main body of Italian troops in Libya falling back upon Benghazi just ahead of the pursuing British armored battalions was reported tonight to have been pushed to a point 60 to 70 miles from that strongly fortified base in a retreat proceeding at the rate of 30 miles a day. Elsewhere over the whole vast area of the African struggle, new successes were claimed for British arms. In the running rear guard action along the Libyan coast, the British High Command announced 400 Italian stragglers already have fallen captive, and there were indications that the full shock power of the British forces soon would be turned upon Benghazi itself, which is 325 miles from the Egyptian frontier. Rome, February 5th. German bombers, the Italian High Command said today, had again attacked airports on the British Mediterranean island of Malta, hitting hangars and barracks and starting fires. In the African War, the High Command said that Italian counterattacks threw back a British advance on the Eritrean front, but Italian native troops were forced to withdraw after hard fighting around Lake Stefani in southern Ethiopia. Athens, Greece, February 5th. Greek soldiers drove the Italians from positions of great strategic importance and captured a village by a bayonet charge and hand-to-hand fighting, the Greek spokesman reported tonight. Italian prisoners told their Greek captors that the fascists no longer were using the port of Valona as a base because of repeated bombings, but were unloading supplies at Crionero, south of Valona, Krionero. Despite 3 days of torrential rain in the Tepelini section, Greek troops continued mopping up operations and launched new attacks with success, it was reported. 2 well-prepared counterattacks were launched by the Italians in the coastal sector, the Greek spokesman declared, but they were repulsed and the fascists fled in confusion, abandoning the dead and wounded on the field of battle. Bitold, Yugoslavia, February 5th. Italy was reported in dispatches to this border town tonight to be rushing reinforcements by air to help the hard-pressed defenders of Tepelini. London, February 5th. After sweeping offensive actions that ran twice around the clock, the British tabulated tonight a series of aerial blows at Germany's war industries, transport, airfields, potential invasion bases, and facilities for the counter-blockade of Britain. It was the British Air Force's biggest action in the last 2 weeks. Through darkness and daylight, heavily laden bombers crossed the English Channel, the so-called invasion coasts of France and Belgium, the northern French interior, and a vital industrial section of Western Germany. Berlin, February 5th. In the air and on the sea, the Germans today claimed they had dealt heavy blows against Great Britain. A British attempt to bomb the German-occupied Channel ports in the daytime ended with a complete collapse, the Nazis declared. Making use of low clouds, British bombers tried to cross the French Channel coast. They were intercepted by swarms of German Messerschmitt pursuit ships and interceptor planes. The Germans claimed that 17 British planes were shot down and the remaining British bombers forced to return before reaching their objectives. 15 British planes were shot down by pursuit ships, while 2 others were shot down by anti-aircraft guns, the Germans claimed, stating that they had no losses. Dublin, February 5th. Ireland's government announced today that this morning a German aircraft crashed in the vicinity of Schull, County Cork. 5 of the crew were killed and the 6th man badly injured, the announcement said. Schull is a little coastal town in southwestern Ireland. Nazi long-range bombers from French bases have been operating off Western Ireland against shipping in the Atlantic. London, February 6th. A denunciation of the Nazi regime by Wendell Willkie made as he left for home in the form of a message to the German people will be scattered far and wide over Germany in a special leaflet raid. Tell the German people that we German Americans reject and hate the aggression and lust for power of the present German government, Willkie said in his message. The message was broadcast last night to Germany. The Daily Herald told of the plans to, quote, bomb, unquote, Germany with leaflets bearing the message and added, already printed copies of it are on their way to the German people through underground channels. I am purely of German descent, Willkie's message stated. My family name is not Willkie, but Willicke. My grandparents left Germany 90 years ago because they were Protestants against autocracy and demanded the right to live as free men. I, too, claim that right. I am proud of my German blood, but I hate aggression and tyranny. Tell the German people that my convictions are shared to the full by the overwhelming majority of my fellow countrymen of German descent. They too believe in freedom and human rights. Washington, D.C., February 5th. Secretary of the Navy Knox said today the British aircraft carrier Illustrious, surviving air attacks which cost her about 80 men killed and 20 bombing planes destroyed in one direct hit by a 1,000-pound bomb, had arrived in Alexandria, Egypt, under her own power from Malta. Knox's disclosure was the first mention of the number killed and the crossing of the Mediterranean from Malta, where the newest of Britain's carriers first headlimped to refuge. Low-flying German bombers pounced on the Illustrious in a 7-hour torpedo and bomb attack last January 10th. Scarred but still plodding through the Mediterranean, the ship made port at Malta, where the attacks were renewed. As a result of the follow-up attacks, the German news agency DNB said that a long time would be required for repairs on the ship. London, February 5th. The casual way in which President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill first talked to each other and now have become close friends through the medium of Harry Hopkins, the president's personal representative in Britain, was revealed tonight. Soon after his arrival here, the Tribune was informed that Hopkins, visiting Churchill at number 10 Downing Street, home of British prime ministers for more than 3 centuries, phoned Roosevelt and told the president, "Franklin, I am sitting here with Winston. Would you like to have a word with him?" As a result, Roosevelt and Churchill exchanged greetings, ignoring the formalities and calling each other by their first names, a custom which was preserved in subsequent transatlantic phone talks. Thursday's Daily Mail, in a long article on its editorial page headed, "It is Winston and Franklin now," played up Hopkins' part in in cementing a fast friendship between the American president and the British Prime Minister. It then related the story of the phone conversation, describing Hopkins as the Brenner Pass between Roosevelt and Churchill. Through this man, the leaders of the two democracies got to know the working of each other's mind, the paper said, although the two never met or staged spectacular personal conferences, as have Adolf Hitler and Premier Mussolini at the Brenner Pass on the German-Italian border. Pointing out that nearly all press photos of Churchill recently have shown him accompanied by Roosevelt's personal observer, the Daily Mail added, "Hopkins and Churchill have lived as closely as any two men could, visiting coast defenses together, inspecting ships, and attending conferences whereat only the heads of the country were present." Sofia, Bulgaria, February 5th. Ivan Bagrianov, pro-German Minister of Agriculture who resigned yesterday, today was awarded a high decoration by King Boris. He received the Cross of St. Alexander, which is usually reserved for those retiring permanently from politics. This caused speculation whether this was the king's way of announcing that Bagrianov is through with public affairs. Hong Kong, February 5th. Laughlin Currie, administrative assistant to President Roosevelt, arrived here on a Clipper plane today and prepared to fly tomorrow to Chongqing, seat of Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek's government. Vichy, France, February 5th. The return of Pierre Laval, the man who wants thoroughgoing collaboration with Nazi Germany, to a position of power in the French government, second only to that of Marshal Henry Philippe Pétain, Chief of State, appeared likely tonight, official circles reported. After a stormy 2-hour meeting of the Council of Ministers, it was reported a proposed cabinet had been evolved in which Laval would be president of the Council of Ministers and Minister of the Interior. Rome, February 5th. Pope Pius chatted today with a dozen German soldiers who, in a party of 1,000 persons, were admitted to a general audience. The Pope, speaking in German, told his German visitors that he was happy to be able to receive and bless them. Washington, D.C., February 5th. The Navy Department disclosed today that the Navy had offered to turn over 30 Grumman fighter planes to Greece free of charge, but that the Greek minister had turned down the offer with the explanation that his country wanted new planes. At the same time, it was revealed that arrangements had been made for China to obtain 100 American-made warplanes ordered in this country by Great Britain, but not yet delivered. It was stated that the Chinese government had asked for 500 planes to use in her war with Japan. Under the arrangements finally worked out, the British agreed to accept the deferred deliveries for 100. Damascus, Syria, February 5th. General Henry Dentz, French High Commissioner, appealed to Syria's army and civilians yesterday to stand behind Marshal Pétain. London, February 5th. Workers performing tasks considered vital to Great Britain's war effort are going to get some meat to eat each day, the Ministry of Food said tonight. Arrangements have been made, the ministry said, to supply 1 1/2 pence, about 2.5 cents daily, worth of meat for every such worker. This is the equivalent of about 1 ounce steak daily. Meat supplies to school canteens were cut 50% at the same time. The Food Ministry also announced a further curtailment of meat available in cafes and restaurants catering to the rich. 3 restaurants, including the famous Romano's, have been forced to close owing to a lack of supplies. Bratislava, Slovakia, February 5th. Beginning tomorrow, Slovakians will eat a standard bread. It will contain 55% wheat flour, 15% coarse rye, 20% barley, and 10% potato. Berlin, February 5th. Authorized sources said today that Polish workers in Germany had been denied the right to own or use bicycles primarily because steel and rubber were scarce. The Poles also were said to have shown a lack of discipline, resulting in accidents on Berlin streets. Moscow, February 5th. 16 members of religious sects have been convicted of anti Soviet activities in a trial at Stalingrad, for being sentenced to death, the others to prison. Santiago, Chile, February 5th. A Pan American Grace Air Company expedition today returned from Los Arizos Heights in the Andes Mountains, where it located the wreckage of the company's mail and freight plane that crashed in June 1938 with 4 crewmen. 3 bodies were located. 2 were those of the American pilot and co-pilot Donald Sheets and Robert Supple. New York, February 5th. The American rescue ship Mission has leased the ship and arranged to transport 450 Spanish Republican refugees from French camps to permanent homes in Mexico within a few weeks, it was announced tonight. And now for national news. Washington, D.C., February 5th. With the close of general debate in the House today on the dictator bill, the congressional ring was cleared for the main event in this crucial. The trio joined in the assertion that Congress was better qualified and more to be trusted than the chief executive in deciding how to assist England without involving this nation at war. The witnesses were James S. Kemper, Chicago insurance man and president of the United States Chamber of Commerce, Alan Valentine, president of the University of Rochester, and Dr. Herbert Wright, authority on international law, who is a member of the faculty of the Catholic University of America, Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., February 5th. Representative Charles A. Halleck, Republican Indiana, who nominated Wendell Willkie of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, today announced his opposition to the president's dictatorship bill as tending to involve the United States in the European war. Halleck's statement was a repudiation of Willkie's endorsement of the bill, which led to his being sent to Europe as an observer for President Roosevelt. In times of crisis and emergency, representative government may have to grant added powers to centralized government, Halleck said, but clearly this should not bring about an abdication by Congress of its constitutional functions. If a decision to greater aid Britain is to be made, Congress should participate in the making of that decision. Washington, D.C., February 5th. Debate in the House on the president's dictator bill was interrupted today by a woman in the gallery wearing a black dress and a skull mask. My novena, death is the final victor, she chanted, rising and waving her hands, which were sheathed in white gloves. Representative Stephen M. Young, Democrat, Ohio, had just declared himself unalterably opposed to sending American men to die on foreign battlefields when his colleagues rose, shouting and pointing toward the gallery. Still chanting ghoulishly, the young woman walked slowly toward the guards who had rushed up to silence her. Taken to police headquarters, she identified herself as Margaret Russell, 22 years old, of New York City. She said she was born in Denton, Texas, and had attended Vassar College. She claimed authorship of a pamphlet, The Flame, written under the name Andrea in behalf of the New Women's Party, which was found in her purse. She later was put on a train for New York. Washington, D.C., February 5th. Donald Nelson appeared tonight to have won his fight for the centralized powers he had requested as chief of the purchasing division of the Office of Production Management. Nelson had drawn up a memorandum of his duties as he saw them and transmitted it to Frederick Eaton, attorney in the production division. Eaton had requested the memorandum at the insistence of William Knudsen, Director General of the OPM. Copies were sent to the War and Navy departments. When the draft came back to Nelson, many of his specifications had been stricken out, and this led to reports he would resign. President Roosevelt's intervention was said to be responsible for the change. Under the powers to be accorded, Nelson will be centralization of authority to clear ordnance for the Army and Navy. The purchasing division will not have authority to sign contracts, but it will supervise them and will seek to assist in planning these purchases on a long-term basis. Washington, D.C., February 5th. The House completed congressional action today on an emergency bill carrying $313,500,000 for construction of 200 new cargo ships described by President Roosevelt as necessary to protect the United States against a world shortage of such vessels. The measure now goes to the White House. Final action on the bill came when the House accepted Senate amendments, including one which would give the Maritime Commission a $65 million additional contractual authority to carry on its regular shipbuilding program. Washington, D.C., February 5th. Congress will be requested to vote supplemental appropriations of $156,750,000 for construction of 37,000 family dwelling units in defense areas, C.F. Palmer, Defense Housing Coordinator, announced tonight. At the same time, he said Congress will be asked to amend the National Housing Act in order to set up a defense housing insurance fund of $10 million to underwrite $100 million in mortgages on 1 to 4 family dwelling units in defense areas. Palmer said that this action would be designed to expedite participation by private industry in the defense housing program. New York, February 5th. Headed by National Commander Milo J. Warner, an American Legion mission of 4 men left today for Lisbon on the Yankee Clipper on their way to study civilian defense methods in England. The Legion mission will primarily look, listen, and learn, Warner said. He said they hope to return by March 1st after spending a few days in unoccupied France. Warner said the mission had the approval of President Roosevelt and the State Department. Stressing that the mission is non-political, Warner said that all expenses of the trip are being paid for by the Legion. New York, February 5th. The United States lines operating through a Panamanian subsidiary will soon place 5 recently acquired freighters in the New York, England run to carry planes, munitions, and other supplies to Britain, line officials said today. The freighters West Camp Gow, West Pocasset, Jacob Rupert, Egremont, and Bakersfield, all slightly under 6,000 gross tons, were purchased from the Maritime Commission for $1,328,384 on January 23rd. Averaging about 20 years old, they were a part of the Commission's laid-up fleet. Washington, D.C., February 5th. Taking precautions similar to those during actual warfare, Secret Service agents today began fingerprinting and photographing all newspaper correspondents and others who are admitted regularly to the White House. Wartime restrictions also have been extended to cover callers at the War and Navy Department building. The roundup of White House correspondents will continue tomorrow in the executive offices. Honolulu, Territory of Hawaii, February 5th. The Pacific Fleet moved to sea at full strength today to resume training exercises. At least 10 battleships were in line, together with airplane carriers, cruisers, and other warships. Washington, D.C., February 5th. The War Department today announced the mass promotion of 1,013 new field officers. The announcement said that 1,013 captains taken from almost every branch of the Army had been raised to the temporary grade of major as of January 31st. At the same time, the department announced 78 other promotions to temporary rank, covering grades all the way from first lieutenant to colonel. Washington, D.C., February 5th. More than 5,000 cases of syphilis have been found among prospective draftees, the Public Health Service reported today. This number was found among 120,751 men examined by draft boards during November and December in 23 states, the report added. Rates among the states included showed anywhere from 7 to 114 cases of syphilis to every 1,000 men examined. The largest proportions were in southern states. The report said that several states, notably North Carolina and Alabama, provided blood tests on a voluntary basis to men registered under the Draft Act. The preliminary rate for North Carolina was 78 cases of syphilis per 1,000 men examined. The highest rate among draftees called for examination was 114 cases per 1,000 men and was found in Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Georgia. Wilmington, Delaware, February 5th. More than 26,000 persons were added to the payrolls of the E.I. DuPont de Nemours and Company during 1940, according to the company's annual report to be released next week. Employees at the end of 1940 totaled 81,000. Those at work on new construction projects numbered 23,100, compared with 4,600 a year earlier. Operations employed 57,900, or about 15% more than in 1939. The total of all wages and salaries paid in 1940 was $129,600,000. Comparing the figures with those of 1929, the report states that the average annual earnings company employees in 1940 were 19% higher than in 1929, while the average number of hours worked was 17% less. Washington, D.C., February 5th. Although Henry Ford has said he would rather construct complete bombing planes on a mile-long assembly line of his own, War Department officials said today they were still sticking to a plan for Ford to make bomber parts which would be assembled by aircraft companies elsewhere. Ford representatives made a counterproposal to the effect that they would like to construct the entire bomber in Ford plants. General Oliver P. Eccles, chief of the Materials Division of the Air Corps, and General George H. Brett, chief of the Air Corps, returned to Washington from Detroit, Michigan, and submitted recommendations to higher authorities. What those recommendations was not disclosed, but in view of the subsequent statements that the department intended to go ahead with its previous plan, it was assumed that Air Corps officials had decided against the counterproposal. Arrangements for Ford to make parts and subassemblies to be used in bomber construction elsewhere have been underway for several months. New York, February 5th. Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt told strikers of the Leviton Manufacturing Company today that she was personally grateful that they had stood together to gain things that will make life better for your group as a whole. The strikers, members of the AFL, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, packed the Brooklyn Hall and overflowed into the streets to hear the president's wife. The union estimated the crowd at between 1,400 and 1,700 and said practically every striker came except 6 who remained on the picket line at the electrical appliance plant. The strike began 6 months ago, the union demanding higher wages. Ringgold, Georgia, February 5th. Charles Coates, a life-term fugitive from Missouri, was convicted today of having murdered Corporal W.F. Black of the Georgia Highway Patrol and was condemned to death in the electric chair March 7th. Black had stopped Coates' automobile to admonish him against recklessness. Coates, 29 years old, was captured in East Tennessee after a 5-day search by posses and bloodhounds. New Haven, Connecticut, February 5th. Authorities tonight were investigating the possibility of sabotage in connection with a fire that took 10 lives early today at New Haven Quilt and Pad Company, where Army quilting contracts were being filled. It was New Haven's costliest fire and loss of life. Multiple inquiries were launched into claims of workmen that a fire door was ordered shut, trapping the 10 in a flame-filled room, and that the Automatic sprinkler system in the three-story brick building had been shut off. I am going to investigate the case, said Coroner James J. Corrigan, particularly to determine whether there was sabotage and to fix responsibility for it. I don't say there was sabotage, but there are certain phases of the case that definitely bear investigation. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, February 5th. The American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, also known as ASCAP, 19 music publishing corporations, and 26 musicians and music writers were charged with violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act in a criminal information filed in federal court here today by the Justice Department. The defendants will be arraigned March 5th. The information charges that the defendants conspired to pool and control illegally copyrighted music available for commercial use and public enjoyment for the purpose of eliminating competition and monopolizing the supply, to discriminate unreasonably and illegally against users of copyrighted music, to discriminate against authors and composers who are not members of ASCAP, to restrain author and composer members of ASCAP from exercising the rights afforded them by the Copyright Act, to restrict music from public performance by licenses in order to exact additional performance compensation and recording fees not permitted by the copyright laws, to restrain composers in their right to bargain for the sale of their own music, to engage in illegal price fixing, to restrict from public enjoyment through commercial performance much of America's most beautiful copyrighted music unless ASCAP prices and terms are complied with. Kansas City, Missouri, February 5th. The Santa Fe Railway's huge new diesel-electric locomotive, number 100, the first of its type to be used in regular mainline freight service, last night hauled 80 cars 218 miles from Fort Madison, Iowa to Kansas City. It traveled 60 miles an hour at times using only half its power. To a group riding in the train in a railroad business car, the trip was as comfortable as if it were made in a passenger train. There were a couple of jolts at switching points, but that was all. And now back to local and regional news. A motor caravan made up of more than 1,000 members of the America First Committee will travel to Springfield next Tuesday to urge passage of the resolution now before the Illinois House of Representatives, demanding defeat of the war dictatorship bill in Congress. This was decided yesterday at a meeting of the chairman of 23 of the 34 Illinois chapters of the America First Committee in the offices of the Chicago chapter at 122 South Michigan Avenue. Mrs. Janet Ayer Fairbank, vice chairman of the Chicago chapter of America First, said the motor caravan will originate in Chicago and will be made up of representatives from the war veteran, labor, and colored divisions of the organization. Other chapters will join the caravan as it passes through Illinois on the way to the capital. Mrs. Fairbank said that at least 150 automobiles would make up the Chicago part of the caravan. At the same time, Mrs. Fairbank reported that anti-war protests through the Chicago chapter of the committee now totaled 628,000. She reported that 1,800 signatures were gathered at a meeting in Pontiac, a town of 8,000 population. Members of the Citizens Keep America Out of War Committee said yesterday that they have gathered more than 600,000 signatures demanding that the United States be kept out of the European war. 250 women attended a meeting of the Mothers Crusade to defend Bill 1776 in the LaSalle Hotel last night to make plans for sending a delegation to Washington, D.C. to protest against passage of President Roosevelt's dictator bill. We're not only going to march through the streets of Washington, but we're going to get on the main floor of the Senate by hook or crook, Mrs. Charles Fisher, national president of the Mothers Mobilizing Against War, declared. Mrs. Elizabeth Dilling, Chicago director of the Mothers Crusade, threatened, "We'll have those senators' teeth chattering so loud the folks back home will be able to hear them." The women plan to send a Chicago delegation of 500. Those unable to pay part or all of the $20.85 round-trip ticket cost may apply to Mrs. Mary Leach, chairman of reservations at Mothers Crusade headquarters, 53 West Jackson Boulevard, for tickets purchased with Crusade funds. Springfield, Illinois, February 5th. Representative Lottie Holman O'Neill's resolution voicing Illinois' protest against the Roosevelt dictator bill was sent to the floor of the House of Representatives today by action of the Executive Committee. The vote for this step was 14-5. The reason stated by the maker of the motion and the attitude of the majority was that the protest is of such momentous importance that every member of the House should have full opportunity to express his views. A count of noses, however, showed a majority of the committee would have been in favor of recommending adoption of the resolution if the roll call had come on that question. Mount Vernon, Illinois, February 5th. Funeral services for Lewis L. Emerson, former governor of Illinois, will be held tomorrow at 2 p.m. in the Mount Vernon High School auditorium. The Reverend Robert B. Guthrie of Mount Vernon and the Reverend John T. Thomas of Springfield, minister of Presbyterian Churches, Mr. Emerson attended, will officiate. The body will lie in state at the family home here before the services. Interment will be at Oakwood Cemetery here. Old friends and business associates will act as pallbearers, and ranking political leaders and state office holders will be honorary pallbearers. In Springfield, the legislature adopted a resolution honoring Emerson, who was governor from 1929 to 1933, by designating a committee of 10 senators and 10 representatives to attend the funeral. Governor Dwight Green will head a state house delegation. Lieutenant Governor Hugh W. Cross and several other state officers will also attend. Emerson, 77 years old, died late yesterday of a heart ailment. Indianapolis, Indiana, February 5th. A legislative investigation was opened officially today into charges that alien votes helped elect Democrat Henry F. Schricker to the governorship last November 5th. The General Assembly has been asked to void the election and declare Republican Glenn R. Hillis the winner. A joint legislation committee of 14 members chosen to conduct the inquiry held its first meeting at the State House. A chairman and a secretary were elected at the first business of the group. The committee, composed of 7 senators and 7 representatives, adjourned after a brief session with the understanding it will be called to order again at the instance of the chairman. Jefferson City, Missouri, February 5th. Partisan bickering over the contest for the governor's office created an uproar in the Missouri House of Representatives today, with Democrats and Republicans blaming each other for Missouri's current governmental muddle. The fight was only part of an uproarious session that bespoke the taut nerves in the battle over Democratic refusal to seat Forrest C. Donnell, Republican, as governor, and their insistence as the legislative majority on a contest of his election. Majority Floor Leader H.P. Loff of Jefferson City said that a demonstration staged last week by Donnell supporters constituted an attempt at mob and gang rule. His colleague shouted the House into adjournment to cut off Republican replies. More than 10,500 cadets of the ROTC signed up for another semester of military training in Chicago high schools yesterday. Thousands more were turned away for lack of uniforms and equipment. The enrollment was the largest voluntary enrollment in the 24 years since the ROTC was established in the Chicago schools under the sponsorship of the Chicago Tribune. Only in 1919 and 1920, when 14,500 students received compulsory military training, was the enrollment larger. If necessary, funds were provided by the War Department. The ROTC in Chicago could not be doubled, said Major Frank L. Beals, Assistant Superintendent of Schools and Administrator of ROTC activities. Staff sergeants in every school requested an increase in allotments, but all were refused. Camp Shelby, Mississippi, February 5th. Private Clyde Ross of Greensburg, Indiana, fled into the woods today when a motor convoy overtook his company and the commander shouted, "Bear to the right." Found later, he explained, "I'm scared of bears." A decision handed down February 1st by Peter T. Swanish, Commissioner of Placement and Unemployment Compensation for the state of Illinois, was viewed yesterday as setting a precedent that may prevent strikers at the tractor plant of the International Harvester Company from collecting unemployment benefits. The strike, called by the Farm Equipment Workers Organizing Committee CIO, began January 30th. It has thrown 6,500 employees out of work. Negotiations between the company and union heads have been started, but their conference yesterday ended with little progress towards settlement. David T. Reedley, a federal labor conciliator, announced he would seek advice in Washington before calling the representatives together again. Reports were current in the United States courthouse yesterday that William R. Billy Skidmore, along the reputed fixer for the Chicago gambling rackets, has determined to fight the government's effort to send him to prison as an income tax evader. His trial, to be held before Judge Philip L. Sullivan, is set for February 24th. It is charged that he failed to pay $800,000 in taxes between 1933 and 1937. In Washington, it was said Skidmore had made a compromise offer in a civil suit to compel payment, but was told the criminal case must be disposed of first. The 28-month prison sentence assessed against Edward P. Jones, colored policy king who pleaded guilty to a charge of evading $198,786 of taxes, is believed to have convinced Skidmore that a plea of guilty would not save him from a long stay in prison. J. Albert Wohl, United States District Attorney, expressed confidence yesterday that Skidmore will be convicted. First Assistant State's Attorney Wilbert F. Crowley sent an assistant prosecutor to the Woodlawn Police Station last night to question 25 men arrested in an alleged handbook at 6313 University Avenue. Crowley said that in the future, every person taken in a gambling house is to be interviewed by an assistant state's attorney before being eligible to bail. State's Attorney Courtney Ann Crowley said they were determined to give such service to arresting police in the future as to prevent any slipshod presentation of evidence to the courts. In the Woodlawn District raid, 22 patrons and 3 operators were arrested. The patrons were charged with frequenting a gambling house and the operators with keeping a gaming house. The raid was made at 3:30 p.m., but it was 5:30 before individual questioning was begun and 9:30 before it was completed. State's Attorney Charles Siddell of Kane County, Aurora Elgin District, said yesterday that he will order the seizure of all coin machines paying a reward in cash, tokens, or free games. This followed his receipt of an opinion from Attorney General George F. Barrett that all such machines are gambling devices. This opinion gives my office a powerful weapon, which we formerly did not possess, Siddell said. The most difficult job was to prove that these machines were gambling devices. With this new ruling, we can pick them up wherever found without a search warrant, take them to Geneva, and destroy them on court order. Slot machines and pinball machines were banned in Chicago several years ago. Miss Elizabeth Connor, about 70 years old, was found dead last night in the basement of her rooming house at 32 Bellevue Place after a visit by a daylight burglar. Dr. Paul Schmidt, coroner's physician, said she had been strangled. Captain Thomas Harrison of the East Chicago Avenue Police ordered a search for John Ballard, 32 years old, an ex-convict who has been Miss Connor's janitor for several months. Ballard and his wife moved out of the house Tuesday night after Miss Connor discharged them. Harrison said Ballard might know if any strangers had been lurking nearby recently. The discovery that the house had been robbed was made by Miss Martha Morrison, 24 years old, a mail-order house advertising employee, when she returned to her room after work. Her radio, jewelry, and part of her clothing had been stolen, and belongings of her roommate, Miss Ellen Kudo, age 20, were missing. Miss Morrison told another lodger, Harry Keating, age 22, he went to summon Miss Connor and found her room ransacked. Captain Harrison and Sergeant Robert Ryan were called. In a vacant room in the basement, they found Miss Connor's body on an old bed. Her feet were bound by a towel and her chin was bruised. Sergeant Francis Donahue and Ollie Karowski, coroner's investigators, learned Mrs. Connor customarily kept the receipts in her room, but no money could be found. kept rent receipts in her room, but no money could be found. A true bill charging the rape of a girl 15 years old was reported to have been voted by the Kane County Grand Jury at Geneva yesterday against George Klidsky, 47, a carpenter living near Geneva. The girl, his housekeeper, accused him while he was being questioned regarding a mysterious fire in which his neighbor and tenant, Mrs. Barbara Dahlquist, age 28, was burned to death last December 1st. No charge has been filed against him in connection with the fire. A study of the records of Cook County Hospital yesterday by Clayton F. Smith, president of the county board, showed that the hospital's overcrowded condition is one of long standing. For the last 5 years, the records show the hospital has been taxed to the saturation point. The curve in the hospital graph once was an index to conditions in Chicago. Until 1939, sickness among the poor followed the index of prosperity, declining in good times, rising in bad. But in the last 2 years, although employment has increased, sickness apparently has also. Progress in the fight against venereal diseases and prostitution was reported yesterday as health officials and law enforcement agents at a meeting in the Palmer House observed National Social Hygiene Day. Dr. Herman Bunsen, president of the Chicago Board of Health, said the rate of syphilis infections revealed by blood tests has gone progressively downward since the city began its fight against the disease. During the 1938-39 fiscal year, he said 7% of the 371,693 persons who took blood tests were found to be infected. In 1939-40, this dropped to 4.9% of 326,933 tests. Police Commissioner Allman said the police are combating commercialized vice to the utmost, considering it as a scourge and not as a necessary evil. Judge Jay Schiller of Women's Court suggested the erection of detention homes for infected prostitutes where they could be held and treated. At an earlier session presided over by Dr. Irving S. Cutter, health editor of the Chicago Tribune, Lieutenant Colonel David L. Robeson cited the need for controlling soldiers off duty and urged that civil authorities cooperate with Army officials in this regard. Tremendous numbers of young men are being inducted into the armed services, he said. They wear identical uniforms and they lose their identities and their inhibitions. The temptation is tremendous. The City Council yesterday directed its Traffic Committee to recommend a policy toward a superhighway bill sponsored by the Cook County Highway Department and pending before the legislature at Springfield. The council said Alderman Arthur G. Lindell, 9th Ward, author of the resolution, should decide whether to endorse or oppose this proposal to build toll roads in this county. The two new electroliners of the Chicago, North Shore, and Milwaukee Railroad, termed the most luxurious electric interurban trains in the country, will make their initial trips today. Carrying as guests 270 manufacturers, editors, and officials of cities along the route, the trains will leave at 11:30 a.m., one from Chicago and the other from Milwaukee. They will meet at about 12:30 in Waukegan, and lunch will be served the guests at the Glen Flora Country Club. Then the four-car articulated streamlined trains will return to their respective terminals. The trains, which are scheduled to make 5 trips each way daily between Chicago and Milwaukee on the Skokie Valley route, will be placed in regular service on Sunday. Each train is 155 feet 4 inches long and is comprised of 4 units, each joined to the adjacent unit. There are 30 coach seats and 10 seats in smoking compartments in the front and rear units. One of the inner units is an all-coach compartment seating 40 passengers, and the other is a tavern lounge with a capacity for 26. And in sports, Loyola and DePaul University basketball teams last night gave 6,500 of their clients an interesting, if unsatisfactory, evening in the Coliseum, both losing their respective sides of their collegiate doubleheader. The Blue Demons made a slightly better showing, yielding to the University of Toledo Rockets 55-51, only after an overtime session, while Loyola surrendered a 14-point lead and losing to Temple's Owls 43-40. DePaul was going along with no a special difficulty through the first half, from which it emerged with a comfortable 24-18 margin. The Demons built that edge up to 31-24 in the second period before Marshall Carlson, captain of the Rockets and also one of the ablest collegiate golfers in the land, began to tee off in direction of the Toledo offense. The result was that Toledo took a 48-45 lead, which seemed safe until Carter O'Rourke connected on Bob Nash's fourth personal foul, and then with less than a minute left, Jim Kaminsky hit on a one-handed try to tie it up. Bob Quinn of the Rockets scored first in the overtime, and O'Rourke's free throw was matched by Bob Hayes. O'Rourke then connected on a follow-up shot, but Bob Gerber's long shot, which teetered on the basket rim, decided the issue. The Loyola Temple battle started out as though the boys were tying for a low score. Temple leading by only 10-6 after 8 minutes of play, 9 of these owl tallies being counted by Gorham Getchell before he was withdrawn with 3 personals assessed against him. Here, Jack Dwan, Jack Stanton, and Mickey Rotner stopped fooling. As a result, the Ramblers led 19-10 at the half. Loyola ran its edge to 31-17 before Morris Snyder and Angelo Music went on a spree, which finally gave them a 37-36 lead with 7 minutes remaining. George Wenskis returned the Ramblers to the lead, but Musi dropped in another basket. Dan Cahill of Loyola tied it up a minute later, 40-40, but Getchell then holed out a side shot, and Betchloff countered a free throw. Bill Happick, leading Big Ten Conference scorer with Illinois last year, set a new scoring mark for the current National Basketball League season when he rang up 10 baskets and 5 free throws to lead the Chicago Bruins to a 42-41 victory over the Akron Goodyears in the 132nd Regiment Armory last night before 2,500. The ex-Illini ace, who has taken over Wib Kautz's scoring burden since the latter was laid up with the flu 10 days ago, counted 24 of his points in the first 3 periods. He was out of the game practically all of the fourth period, and then after returning had to leave because of 5 fouls. The Bruins led 13-6 at the end of the first quarter, 25-16 at the half, 36-28 at the end of the third period, and then almost lost in the late minutes when Benny Stephens and Jules Rivlin scored to bring the Invaders within 1 point. The victory gives the Bruins an even break in 16 games and places them in a tie with Detroit for 4th place. In a preliminary Windy City League game, the Masons defeated the Graham Chirons 51-19. Chesterton, Maryland, February 5th. Bill Nicholson, Chicago Cubs outfielder, said today he had sent his contract back to Chicago unsigned and that he planned to talk with the club management. Nicholson said he would stop in Chicago before leaving for spring training. He added he didn't expect any trouble reaching terms. Brooklyn, New York, February 5th. Larry McPhail, president of the Brooklyn Dodgers, today telephoned the St. Louis Browns, and before he had hung up the phone, the Browns had purchased Howard Mills, 29-year-old left-handed pitcher. The Dodgers have been in need of southpaw talent and hope that Mills will be able to return to his skill of 1938 and 1939 when he registered more than 100 strikeouts a season. And that is sports, and that is news as read from the Chicago Tribune. Henry Chop reporting Thursday, February 6, 1941. Have a swell day.